Welcome to our channel HASHMICLINICS.
Welcome to the deep dive. We are really thrilled to have you with us today because we're looking at something that at first glance feels, well, it feels almost like a character description straight out of a Charles Dickens novel.
It really does.
Yeah, but it is, in fact, a highly specific historical medical profile. So imagine an individual who is physically bottom heavy, but kind of top heavy in reverse, whose blood feels like it's quite literally boiling.
And who runs on this incredibly rigid daily schedule of suffering.
Right. And who harbors a deep, silent grief, but physically cannot shed a single tear.
It's a remarkably vivid clinical picture. And the sources we are exploring today for you consist of historical clinical notes, early homeopathic texts, and detailed records of what they called provings.
Provings, right.
That's right.
For anyone brushing up on their 19th century medical history, a proving was essentially an early form of a clinical trial.
Exactly. Healthy volunteers would take these controlled, diluted doses of a specific substance and then just rigorously document every single microscopic symptom it produced, physically and mentally.
And the substance in question today is Ammonium Muriaticum, which is commonly known as sal ammoniac or ammonium chloride. Okay, let's unpack this. Because in this historical medical framework, the mind and the body are treated as a single, indivisible unit.
Completely indivisible.
Right. No detail, no matter how tiny or seemingly localized, was considered irrelevant. The overarching theme here is the Constitution.
Yes, the constitutional profile. Today, if you go to a clinic with, say, a persistent cough, chronic sciatica, and profound melancholia, you are almost certainly getting referrals to a pulmonologist, a neurologist, and a psychiatrist.
Oh, absolutely. 3 different waiting rooms.
Right. But the practitioners documenting Ammonium Muriaticum viewed all of those things as expressions of one underlying systemic imbalance. They weren't looking at isolated broken parts.
They were observing the human organism as a complete interconnected ecosystem that's just struggling to maintain homeostasis. And the physical profile of this particular ecosystem is just incredibly precise. Our sources describe the patient adapted to this remedy as someone who is generally fat and sluggish. They have a large, corpulent torso and a heavy abdomen, but they also have disproportionately thin legs. I'm curious about the diagnostic value of that specific detail. I mean, why would early practitioners focus so heavily on the distribution of body fat and muscle mass?
What's fascinating here is that they were observing profound metabolic and circulatory dysfunction long before we had the technology to actually image it.
So it's not just a casual note on aesthetics.
Not at all. The large, congested torso paired with thin, underdeveloped legs, it represents a fundamental failure in the body's transport systems. The organism's resources, its fluids, its mass, its blood flow, they're all pooling centrally.
So the core is overburdened.
Yes, leaving the extremities essentially starved of proper circulation and nourishment. It points to this deep systemic sluggishness.
But that sluggishness seems to trigger a massive overcompensation in the circulatory system because the texts describe a startling sensation. The patient reports feeling as though their blood is literally boiling inside their blood vessels.
A bubbling sensation.
Yeah. It's accompanied by localized throbbing, intense pulsations, and sudden violent flushes of heat. If the circulation is supposed to be sluggish, how does a physician square that with a sensation of bubbling, boiling blood?
It actually makes perfect physiological sense when you view it through the lens of vascular resistance.
Okay.
If the general circulation is compromised and the central organs are congested, the blood isn't flowing smoothly through the vascular network. It is constantly meeting resistance.
Yeah.
That resistance creates intense pressure, which the patient experiences as throbbing or ebullitions, those sudden rushes of blood. It is essentially the body's internal engine struggling to regulate its own hemodynamics.
Creating these localized, turbulent pockets of heat and pressure.
Exactly.
Now, alongside that boiling sensation, the patient experiences a bizarre physical tension, almost an illusion of tightness. The sources say the patient feels as though their muscles or tendons are too short.
Especially in the hamstring.
Yes, the hamstrings and the groins. The tension is so severe that it forces the person to walk bent over. They're limping, completely unable to stand upright.
That sensation of the hamstrings being painfully contracted is a major keynote of this constitutional profile. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this physical tension is a clear window into the remedy's profound effect on the nervous system.
Right.
The text explicitly linked this feeling of shortened tendons to severe sciatica,
Yeah.
particularly radiating down the left side.
And the rules governing when that sciatica acts up are heavily structured. The pain is agonizingly worse when the patient is sitting down.
Yes.
It improves slightly if they force themselves to walk despite the tightness, but it is entirely relieved the moment they lie down.
Which tells us quite a bit about the mechanical and neurological compression happening in the lower back and pelvis. Sitting loads the spine. It compresses those already inflamed lumbar and sacral nerve roots.
And walking provides some mechanical release.
Right, and it improves the sluggish local circulation we just talked about. But lying down completely removes the gravitational load from the nervous system.
Makes total sense.
However, the neurological implications of this text go far beyond basic sciatica.
They really do, and this brings up what I found to be one of the most astonishing observations in the entire stack of sources.
The phantom limbs.
Yes. Ammonium Muriaticum was documented as an effective application for neuralgic, tearing pains in the stumps of amputated limbs. They were treating phantom limb pain. But how were they documenting and treating phantom limb pain effectively before modern medicine had even conceptualized cortical mapping or neuroplasticity?
It is a brilliant example of acute clinical observation triumphing over a lack of anatomical technology. Long before modern neurology understood that the brain's somatosensory cortex continues to represent a missing limb.
Wow.
Or that severed nerve endings form painful neuromas. These historical observers recognized the phenomenon perfectly. They didn't need an fMRI to see that a severed nerve pathway could still transmit agonizing, tearing pain.
They just trusted the patient's subjective experience.
Exactly, and matched it to the neurological hyperexcitability they saw in the proving data.
It highlights just how meticulous they were about the data they collected. And that meticulous nature extends to the timing of the patient's suffering. The text maps out this profile on a strict, predictable daily schedule.
Like clockwork.
Literally. The patient's body operates on a rigid timetable of symptoms. Let's break down this schedule because it shifts drastically based on the bodily region.
The concept of modalities, which refers to the specific conditions that make a symptom better or worse, including the precise time of day, is a cornerstone of this entire medical philosophy. For these practitioners, when a patient hurt was just as diagnostically critical as where they hurt.
Right. So in the morning, right upon waking, the head and chest symptoms completely dominate. The patient wakes up with a heavy, compressed feeling in the head and a dry, suffocating cough. But by the afternoon, the upper body gets a reprieve and the abdominal symptoms take over. We see intense rumbling, pinching, cramping, and flatulence dominating the middle of the day.
And as the environmental temperature drops and the sun goes down, the systemic priority shifts once again.
Right. In the evening, the skin, the fever, and the limbs flare up. The patient experiences sudden chills, their skin starts intensely itching, and those tearing neuralgic joint pains become severe.
But the absolute peak of suffering for this patient happens at night.
Specifically between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., they are ripped out of sleep by violent colic, frightful backaches that feel like the spine is in a vice, and freezing cold feet. So what does this all mean? Why does the human organism compartmentalize its illness into these rigid time blocks?
It demonstrates a highly sophisticated, if early, understanding of chronobiology and circadian rhythms. Our modern understanding of psychoneuroimmunology tells us that the body naturally fluctuates in its core temperature, cortisol production, and immune cytokine release throughout a 24-hour cycle.
Taking turns, basically.
Exactly. The historical practitioners recognize that a severely compromised body simply does not have the energetic resources to fight a systemic imbalance all at once. The systems take turns.
So the 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. window isn't just a random witching hour, it's a specific physiological state.
Precisely. Between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., human cortisol levels are typically at their absolute lowest, meaning the body's natural anti-inflammatory suppression is removed. At the exact same time, pro-inflammatory immune cells are highly active.
So for a healthy person, this is when the body heals.
Yes. But for a highly inflamed, dysregulated constitution like Ammonium Muriaticum, it is when the pain cascades out of control. The historical texts perfectly mapped a modern immunological phenomenon purely through bedside observation.
That is wild, and that dysregulation also produces some wild temperature extremes. We already discussed the sensation of boiling blood, but the sources highlight a contrasting, very specific keynote symptom, an icy coldness between the shoulder blades, right between the scapulae.
A very strange localized cold spot.
Right. The text notes that absolutely no amount of warm covering, external wraps, or heavy blankets can fix it. It's a localized, unshakable internal cold spot.
That icy sensation between the scapulae is a fascinating referred neurological reflex. In this profile, it almost always accompanies severe respiratory issues. The body might be generating a systemic fever, but that specific dermatome, the area of skin supplied by the spinal nerves between the shoulders, feels like a block of ice.
Meaning the system is misfiring.
It suggests an irritation of the vagus nerve or a severe autonomic nervous system misfire, again highlighting that the circulation isn't just sluggish, it is profoundly confused.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. That confusion shows up in the respiratory system as a glaring paradox. The texts detail a severe coryza, which is the historical term for an acute head cold.
Right.
The patient has a watery, scalding, hot discharge pouring from their nose. It is so chemically acrid and corrosive that it literally excoriates and eats away at the upper lip.
It is a hyperinflammatory state. The immune response is generating an exudate that is chemically destructive to the host's own epithelial tissues.
But despite this hot, corrosive water constantly pouring out of them, the patient's nose feels entirely hopelessly stuffed.
A total paradox.
Yeah, they feel a sensation of a large, rough physical obstruction in their upper sinuses. This leads to constant, frantic, but completely unavailing efforts to blow the obstruction out. They blow their nose until it bleeds, but the pressure never relieves.
This introduces a critical physiological theme for this constitution: the nature of its secretions. In the Ammonium Muriaticum profile, mucus secretions are simultaneously overproduced and painfully retained. We frequently see what historical texts refer to as catarrhs, which are essentially severe, thick, exudative inflammations of the mucous membranes.
The sources describe this mucus as glary, which is an archaic term, but it means the discharge looks and behaves exactly like the raw white of an egg. It is highly tenacious, stringy, and thick.
Because it is so tenacious, the cilia in the respiratory tract simply cannot clear it. This creates a profound, suffocating oppression in the chest.
I can imagine.
The texts describe a noisy, rattling chest where the patient is constantly scraping their throat, suffering from severe hoarseness, and struggling in vain to expectorate this sticky, glary phlegm. The respiratory system is effectively drowning in its own protective mechanisms.
The body cannot let go of the very waste it desperately needs to expel. And that overarching theme of painful retention carries directly down into the digestive tract. The obstinate constipation described in this profile is remarkably detailed.
The clinical precision in the gastrointestinal notes is striking, especially regarding the mechanics of elimination.
The patient experiences constipation where the stools are incredibly hard, requiring massive, exhausting muscular effort to move. But here is the defining quirk. The stool uniquely crumbles to pieces right at the verge of the anus.
Right at the exit.
Exactly. It requires all this internal effort, and then it simply breaks apart at the exit. Furthermore, the sources explicitly note that no two stools are ever the same color. They vary wildly from one bowel movement to the next.
I have to wonder, is the liver just malfunctioning on a whim here?
It certainly points to highly erratic biliary function. The ever-changing colors of the stool indicate that the liver and gallbladder synthesis and secretion of bile are fundamentally unstable. One day the system is flooded, the next it is starved.
And the crumbling stool. The crumbling nature of the stool right at the anal verge indicates a complete absence of moisture and mucosal lubrication in the lowest segment of the digestive tract. It ties perfectly back to how this constitution mismanages fluids.
Pouring scalding water out of the nose, but leaving the distal bowel completely desiccated.
Exactly.
We also see this digestive distress violently tied to the reproductive system in female patients. During menstruation, the bowels go into a state of complete revolt. The patient experiences diarrhea, severe vomiting, and bloody discharges from the bowels specifically during their menses. And keeping in line with the chronobiology we discussed earlier, that menstrual flow is significantly more profuse at night.
It illustrates a state of extreme pelvic congestion. The sudden influx of blood flow to the reproductive organs during menstruation causes a massive reflex irritation in the adjacent enteric nervous system of the digestive tract.
So the systems are overflowing into each other.
Right. We see this mechanical pressure redirecting again when the texts note that painful burning hemorrhoids flare up specifically after a suppressed leukorrhea, which is a suppressed vaginal discharge. When one physiological pathway of elimination is blocked, the vascular pressure immediately shunts to the rectal veins.
Which brings us to the psychological profile. We've just mapped out a physical body that is tense, contracted, unable to flow smoothly, suffocating on its own thick mucus, and struggling massively to eliminate waste. It stands to reason that this physical gridlock would manifest in the patient's mind.
This raises an important question, particularly for modern listeners familiar with the gut-brain axis. How much of this patient's emotional gridlock is directly driven by the physical stasis in their gut and nervous system? The text suggests the psychological profile is a flawless, direct mirror of the physical suffering.
The documentation describes the patient as deeply melancholic, apprehensive, and weighed down by a silent internal grief. They are carrying a massive burden of sorrow, but the most defining tragic detail of the entire mental profile is this. They have a strong, overwhelming desire to cry, but they absolutely cannot.
The physical mechanism of weeping is completely blocked.
It's heartbreaking.
It is a state of profound emotional stasis. If we synthesize the physical and the mental observations here, the parallels are undeniably clear. Just as their physical tendons are contracted and painfully short, restricting their movement, their emotional bandwidth is entirely locked up.
Just as their chest retains that thick, glary mucus and their bowels retain waste, they retain their grief.
Exactly. They are desperate for the physiological and emotional release of weeping, but they cannot achieve it.
And because they are so internally gridlocked, the text notes they become deeply reserved, inflexible, and uncommunicative. They develop involuntary antipathies towards certain people, meaning they instantly dislike someone for no rational reason and cannot be talked out of it.
Their nervous system is just overwhelmed.
They startle easily from sleep, and they suffer from a profound fear of the dark.
That fear of the dark is a vital psychological symptom. When the lights go out and the external distractions of the day fade away, they are left entirely alone with their internal turmoil. They are left with the boiling blood, the neuralgic pains that peak in the middle of the night, and that massive weight of unwept grief.
The sudden antipathies and the mental inflexibility are the defense mechanisms of a nervous system that lacks the fluidity to process new data or adapt to new people.
The mind has become exactly as rigid and tightly wound as the physical hamstrings.
When you step back and look at the whole picture, from large torso with disproportionately thin legs, to the blood boiling in the veins, the icy cold spot between the shoulder blades, the highly scheduled nighttime aggravations, the crumbling stools, and that tearless, silent grief. It is an extraordinary journey.
It really is.
It is essentially the diagnostic blueprint of a very specific, deeply struggling human being.
And that is precisely why exploring these historical medical texts remains so incredibly valuable today. Even if you, the listener, never encounter Ammonium Muriaticum in a clinical setting, studying this text provides a masterclass in total body observation.
It's incredible.
It serves as a reminder that before the era of hyperspecialization, a physician didn't just check your throat or read your lab results. They analyzed the exact timing of your pain, they evaluated the distribution of your body mass, they noted the changing colors of your digestion, and they cared deeply about whether or not you had the capacity to cry.
They viewed the patient as a complete universe where absolutely everything mattered. Every single idiosyncrasy, every paradoxical physical quirk, and every emotional block was deemed vital data. It's a powerful testament to what can be discovered through pure, undivided attention.
It pushes back against our modern tendency to neatly separate the mind from the physical body. This text makes a highly compelling 19th century argument for somatic symptom integration, proving that you cannot have a contracted, physically stagnant body without it severely impacting your emotional flexibility, and vice versa.
Which leaves us with a rather provocative final thought for you to mull over. We've spent this entire deep dive exploring the hyper-specific, beautifully bizarre criteria used to define a single patient's constitution in the 19th century. So I want you to think about yourself.
It's a great exercise.
Based on this historical, incredibly detailed method of diagnosis, if your body, your daily habits, and your personality were being documented by a practitioner from that era today, what would your bizarre, defining keynote symptom be?
What would they underline?
Exactly. What is the one strange, undeniable physical or emotional quirk that a historical doctor would underline in their notes to explain exactly who you are? Something to ponder as you go about your day. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Professor Dr. Rafat Hashmi is a distinguished homeopathic physician, educator, and researcher with over 4 decades of clinical and teaching experience. He is widely respected for his deep command of Materia Medica, repertory, and constitutional prescribing, combined with a practical, patient-centered approach. Dr. Hashmi has dedicated his career to training generations of homeopathic doctors, blending classical principles with modern clinical insight. He is also known for his innovative work in digital homeopathy, developing educational content, clinical tools, and AI-assisted systems to enhance remedy selection and case analysis. With a strong commitment to ethical practice and lifelong learning, Professor Dr. Rafat Hashmi continues to guide, inspire, and elevate the standards of homeopathic education and patient care.